Every modern municipality rests on a delicate equilibrium. When external forces rapidly alter a city's demographic makeup, the pressure tests the foundation of local governance. Consider Riverton. It is a mid-sized, transitioning American city of 250,000 residents, slowly carving out an economic recovery from decades of industrial decline. Over a span of just 5 years, the immigrant population in Riverton doubled. This chart tracks that demographic surge. Driven by secondary migration and refugee placements, the proportion of recent arrivals jumped from 10 to 20% of the city's total population. Languages and cultural practices that were once isolated to specific neighborhoods on the city's periphery suddenly became prominent fixtures in the central corridors of civic life. When the numbers shift this quickly, the city's baseline infrastructure enters a period of forced stress testing. To study how local leaders navigate this exact pressure, we use an AI-moderated public policy simulation called the Welcoming City. The exercise skips routine administration. Instead, it places participants directly into a highly polarized environment, requiring immediate, adaptive leadership. The defining rule of this environment is structural constraint. Structural constraint is the reality that local governments must operate within strictly bounded legal authority and finite fiscal resources. Participants assume specific institutional roles, such as the mayor, the police chief, or budget director. Operating within these strict silos ensures no single official can unilaterally dictate citywide policy. Decisions must be made using imperfect data, all while managing demands from community factions that insist on absolute, uncompromising outcomes. The true test of governance lies in pragmatic execution. Leaders must negotiate solutions, knowing that almost any viable choice will inevitably alienate a vocal constituency. Municipal systems are deeply interconnected. A bottleneck in one sector creates a cascading effect that rapidly stresses neighboring departments. In Riverton, the local housing market was the first system to fracture under the sudden demographic influx. This flowchart illustrates the bottleneck. As new residents arrive against a static housing supply, vacancy rates drop below 3%, landlords increase rents, and extended families are forced into informal, overcrowded basement units. This immediate squeeze generates intense displacement anxiety among long-term residents. Public discourse quickly hardens around strict zoning enforcement and property values. That anxiety does not stay confined to housing. The structural stress transfers directly to the local school district. As neighborhood demographics shift, classrooms are overwhelmed. Teachers who previously managed 1 or 2 students requiring language support are suddenly assigned 6 or 7. This dilution of educational resources sparks friction at the PTA level. Native-born parents begin questioning how the rapid changes will impact classroom attention and standardized test scores. A policy failure in housing predictably matures into an institutional crisis in education. These tensions converge downtown, where the city's power brokers bring entirely conflicting demands to the economic domain. We can map these competing civic objectives using a multi-agent matrix, plotting economic growth against social equity and institutional power against grassroots action. Here, in the top left quadrant, is the business leader. From their perspective, the demographic shift is a clear engine for economic revitalization. They want to maximize workforce access and minimize regulatory friction, absorbing the new labor pool directly into the city's expanding logistics and warehouse sectors. Operating entirely outside that institutional power structure is the community advocate, positioned here in the bottom right quadrant. Through grassroots mobilization, they demand anti-displacement housing protections, comprehensive language access, and heavily funded inclusion policies. The friction is structural. Policies designed to accelerate commercial growth reliably drive up the housing costs that displace the very groups the advocates are fighting to protect. Local city leaders cannot optimize for both of these factions simultaneously. Effective governance demands negotiating highly visible and very politically costly compromises. Navigating these compromises requires spending community trust. Trust is a highly volatile, zero-sum operational resource. No official feels this constraint tighter than the police chief, who must decide whether local law enforcement will cooperate with federal immigration authorities. This trust ledger models a dilemma. If the department cooperates with federal agents, trust with new arrivals plummets to zero. They stop utilizing public services. Conversely, refusing cooperation triggers fierce backlash from long-term residents, accusing leadership of prioritizing newcomers over core public safety. The ultimate objective for the city's leadership is guiding the population from a state of passive coexistence toward active psychological acceptance. A policy can be mathematically perfect, yet practically useless if its implementation destroys the institutional legitimacy required to enforce it. To survive the simulation, participants quickly learn that they cannot resolve systemic crises alone. The budget director might want to fund targeted integration programs, but doing so risks triggering a structural deficit or forcing cuts to core services like trash collection. The mayor faces a different calculus, balancing the moral imperative of social equity against the absolute necessity of maintaining their own electoral viability. Complex municipal governance is an exercise in cross-sector coalition building. The core mechanism of the Welcoming City simulation is anticipation. Local actors must continually anticipate vertical reactions from state and federal levels of government, integrating them into a cohesive strategy. Leaders must practice disciplined opportunity cost reasoning. They need to know exactly what municipal capacity is being sacrificed with every dollar allocated. Expanding budgets or rewriting zoning codes provides essential tools, but these actions alone do not solve the underlying friction of rapid demographic change. True governance is the active engineering of an environment where deeply polarized groups can negotiate their differences within a shared framework of mutual belonging.